being as it's Halloween, I thought I'd make a video about the holiday and my thoughts on it. And first of all, when I was a child, I was raised in a Christian environment where it was common to believe that the holiday was a celebration of evil, and so it was really kind of just the opposite of Christian values, if you will. So that was my thoughts on it growing up when I was small. It just seemed like a celebration of all that was evil and demonic, and so I figured Halloween was bad. Now, as a adult, I look at it a bit differently, and I've never been into the ghoulish and grotesque elements of Halloween. Never was, and never particularly will be. But there's a lot more layers to what Halloween's actually about, and I do think it's a really nice holiday when you really unpack it a bit. So, first of all, Halloween started off being some sort of a North European tradition. A lot of it came from a pagan origin, and people used to believe things like maybe that you could protect the lives of the living by paying tribute to the spirits of the dead. And so that's kind of where the concept of trick or treat or something like that probably came from. But maybe I'm wrong a little bit. That's the ballpark anyway. And it's also a derivative from these harvest traditions, which have come on down through hundreds of years and been part of society as people have contemplated the abundance of the fall season and the beginning of the winter. And in a way, when we say that Halloween is a celebration of death, perhaps that harkens to the tradition of it being a harvest festival and the beginning of winter. And winter, in a way, is, to some degree, like the death of the year. It's the end of the warm season. It's the end of the growing season. And it's the beginning of something that is bleak and dormant of life. So I would imagine that probably as you go back through time and look at history, you'll find that the celebration of harvest and the paying tribute to the dead is connected. And so just as we are grateful for the season we've had, and we cherish the abundance that we've had, we also realize that all good things come to an end, and one season never lasts forever. So that's where the death part of Halloween is probably rooted in something very common and understandable, which is the end of the harvest season. Another interesting thing about Halloween in the United States and the Americas anyway is that it started off coming to America brought by people who were in many cases rather disadvantaged, probably from an Irish background, and they would come to the United States giving up most of their comforts of life in hopes that they might be able to find new opportunity in the new world. And so they were very much familiar with adversity, and they also kind of marked the end of one thing and the beginning of a new thing by trying to start a new life in a new place, and they brought this tradition with them. So in a way, I think that we are paying a tribute to that part of the past and the traditions of people who brought that culture to America. Because if you think about it, there's Thanksgiving and then you have Halloween. And Thanksgiving was created by the Pilgrims in the United States. It was a American holiday, really, but it was basically a variation on the same theme. It was a harvest festival, but it was a uniquely American take on the principle of a harvest celebration, which already existed in old Europe. So when the migrants came and brought Halloween along with them, they were kind of, I guess, siblings, those two holidays. And so they've remained side by side ever since. But really, at the core of them, they're the same basic thing. They're celebrating the year, and they're acknowledging that it's a crossroads. It's a time of coming to the end of one thing and going through a period which is not marked by abundance, which is marked by leanness, which is marked by a void, if you will. And then also knowledge that springtime will come again, and there will be new beginnings on the other side of the winter. There's also something to be said for the fact that we have a tendency in the materialistic ways of modern life to just look at the world as a very unmagical place. And the changing of the seasons is fundamentally a magical time, because it's something which throughout the ages people haven't understood very well. It seemed like it was naturally mystical to people who didn't understand the changing of the seasons. If you look at the old gods of the classical world, you'll see the story of Persephone, I believe. She was a beautiful daughter of the gods who's abducted and taken to the underworld, and then she was allowed to return to the mortal realm on Earth for 6 months out of the year. And so, as legend has it, it was the grieving of her mother which would make the world desolate during her absence, and it was the celebration of her return which would bring about springtime once again. So when we think about the mystical and the magical, that essence of something that's a little bit more than just the material, it's important for us to hang on to a little bit, because the world tends to get smaller. Even if we don't understand how it all works, we have this intellectual knowledge that everything is sort of mechanical and understandable. And in a way, that's liberating, because it means that everything's possible. But it also takes away that sense of life being amazing and wondrous, perhaps as it was when you were a child and you were afraid of a monster that might be living under your bed or in a closet or something. So I do think that the element of Halloween that celebrates magic is something that is a positive, and I think it's something that we should hang on to in a world of things that are all serious and all understandable and explainable to have something that's truly whimsical and not really explainable by reason or science. Just, witches and candles and all that kind of stuff. I think it's pretty cool. And you don't have to be into the blood and guts and skeletons and stuff to appreciate that. I was looking at a picture of these people going down the street in a small town in our area, and they were all dressed up like witches. And I guess it's a tradition in that town to have a witch run little parade sort of a thing. People dress up like witches and they go out on the town, and it's a thing. Now, I thought about how it wasn't so very long ago when women would be killed for being accused of witchcraft, and many times they just were, I guess, women being women. And in that society, you could have some group of men who would say that their wives weren't behaving, and they would just go burn them alive in the middle of town and say that they believe that they were practicing witchcraft or something. Like, if you think about it, these kinds of things are terrible, and they're things that are part of our past. So we have moved beyond a lot of those things, and I think it's important for us to make sure we don't digress back to the old ways of ignorance and harm that we, in some cases, have moved past. So maybe that's another reason to celebrate Halloween to some degree. So, it's just a lot of different things. You could like the holiday because it's a time of excuses to dress up or something, and you could like it because of the mystical element, and you could appreciate it for the unique element of historical relevance that it has packed away in all of those odd, seemingly conflicting traditions. But regardless of what part of the holiday you look at and you think you want to celebrate, I do think that there's something nice about the holiday. But if I was going to just take one thing away from it, it would really be that principle of the crossroads that we all approach as we go from one season into another. And it's so easy to feel like we come to an end of something, and that's a reason to be sad and to feel like we've lost something. And yet, just like the winter, there's always a spring that breaks on the other side. And we should always try to make the most of the season that we have. But we should also just not be afraid to pull back the veil and look at that void, that loss, to face it boldly and say, you know what, I'm not afraid to die. I'm not afraid of the ending of a season. I'm not going to live my life in any sort of denial. I'm going to celebrate all that is good about this season, and I'm going to also acknowledge that it's not going to last forever, and that's okay. There was a time when Halloween was Christianified, I guess, by the church, because it was a pagan tradition, really, of harvest holiday, and the church wanted to make it a bit more of a Christian holiday, so they made it All Hallows Eve, and the general idea was that the day after would be All Saints' Day, and the day before would be more of a time for contemplating things that are evil and things that are dark and things like death, because you would appreciate more things that are light and things that are good if you first also focused on things which are the opposite of that. And maybe there's a certain elegance to that notion. We appreciate life more if we contemplate how short it is. And isn't it true that as much as we want to say we'd like to have lives that go on forever, we'd like to have infinite money, whatever it might be, we'd like to win, isn't it also true that life's greatest joys are derived from the sense of having limits, the sense of knowing that there's a height you won't reach, that there's a point when you'll run out of time, that there's a season which will come to an end. And yet the silver lining is the hope of knowing that even when we return to dust, new growth rises up from it, just like mushrooms growing out of a log that's fallen. And even if it seems like the end, even if it's the end for us as individuals, it's not the end of us as a collective. It's not the end of life. It's just one season transitioning into the next. Whatever season you find yourself in, accept it as part of the journey that you are meant to travel. And don't fear death. Don't look for it, but don't fear it. Because life is most enjoyable with all of its seasons in turn. Best of luck on your adventure. Till next time. Thank you for watching.